Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to all our participants today for this very topical, very interesting, I must say, webinar which the Bombay Chamber is conducting on the union budget, an interactive perspective. As you all know that we have a very high-powered panel with us today. You would have seen most of them on television or in print media and every single media. They're very much in demand, and we are extremely thankful for them to agree to be with us today. Mr. Nilesh Shah, Chairman, Banking, Finance and Capital Market Committee of the Bombay Chamber. Mr. Abizar Diwanji, Head Financial Services, Ernst & Young. Dr. Soumya Kant Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor, State Bank of India. Professor Anand Narayan, Associate Professor, Head of Public Policy, SBI JRM. Ms. Rajeshri Sabnavis was a chairperson of a direct taxation committee and founder Rajeshri Sabnavis and Associates. And the session will be moderated by Dr. Sachidanand Shukla, who is Chairman, Economic Policy and Research Committee of the Bombay Chamber, and who is also the Chief Economics Mahindra Group. Since the time is very limited, I would directly hand it over to Dr. Shukla to take over and begin the proceedings, because most people would be very keen to learn and hear the perspective from all our experts on the union budget. Over to you, Dr. Shukla.
Thank you, Mr. Khosla. Good evening and welcome everyone to this post-budget panel. As you can see, we have a star-studded panel. Over the next 45 to 50 minutes, what we are trying to do is to get an analytical take on the budget from our experienced and well-regarded panelists. We'll also try and demystify some of the things around the budget. And here is how I propose to go about it. What I'll do is I'll start with a very short context, and then I will engage with our panelists with a few questions. And I'll expect, say, 4 odd minute responses, followed by the second round where we could have slightly shorter answers, about 2 minutes each. So here we go. Given the backdrop of the pandemic this year, this is a shock that has hurt everyone and impacted everybody's lives and balance sheets. I think with that sort of a backdrop and the kind of expectations we had from this budget were really sky high. And I must say that this indeed has been a very bold and positive budget, as you can see from the commentary all around. And for an aspirational economy such as India, this is probably what the doctor ordered right now. And a policy that really lifts all boats by expanding the overall growth pie over the long term is obviously a much preferred, say, strategy during times like these. And I'm glad the government really heeded the advice of the economic survey and the economic advisor. There are some bold privatization moves, focus on capex, health, infra, and even measures to attract global capital, for example. And with a continued, say, focus on agriculture and livelihoods. And this was all done without really burdening anyone with additional taxes. So it looks like a very clear-headed and a sound policy. And the government has shown that it's not really afraid to touch the holy cows. For example, privatization, public sector banks. We, for the first time, trying to privatize these banks. I think these are some big steps. And more importantly, the government has told us that they're not going to break all the piggy banks and tap the same 20 million taxpayers who honestly pay these taxes throughout diligently, right, in the name of welfareism. So they're not taking money from the same set of guys and distributing in the name of welfareism. So I think with that sort of a backdrop, I'll now start with our panelists. Soumya, if I may begin with you. If you can just walk us around in terms of the credibility of the budget, right? I mean, when we talk about budgets, it's important that we really speak about the credibility of these numbers. And also, if you can just walk us through the FCI and the NSSF adjustment that everybody is so confused about. So I would request you to please simplify it for all of us here. So first, the credibility of the numbers, and then some simplification on the FCI and SSF adjustment. Shogun.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin. Actually, I was expecting this question from you. So today morning, I had an extensive study of the accounts so that I don't miss any of them, because I have been also looked into the numbers, and on the budget day itself, even though I did not have time, I actually, when I listened to the FM, she had said this one, but I was confused whether this was done from this year or next year. Let me straight away answer to your question. I think the budget, if you ask me what type of budget it is, I think I'll call it a CSR budget. Basically, CSR is for consolidation, S is for spending, and R is for revival. So if you want me to say, it's a CSR budget. Now, the most important thing about the budget is that I'll come to the credibility and the FCI one, that it assumes a nominal GDP growth of 14.4, which in my sense is an underestimate. So if this 14.4 is an underestimate, and if number could actually go to 15% or even higher, then that actually could give a government even more spending power. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that for the first time, the numbers in the budget are all reasonable. We have a tax buoyancy which is even lower than the tax buoyancy of this fiscal. So basically, in a pandemic year, we had a tax buoyancy of 1.3, and this year tax buoyancy is 1.2, which means that the tax numbers could be actually have an upside. So that's the hope why I expecting a higher nominal GDP growth rate. The third most important thing is that the fiscal deficit numbers, we had been all demanding for a long time that there's a significant gap between the headline number and the off-balance sheet number. For the first time, I think the headline number and the off-balance sheet number is actually converging. Last time, if you remember, we had a fiscal deficit of 3.5% in the beginning. This number was 4.3, including the off-balance sheet borrowing. This year, if I just look into the headline number and the off-balance sheet number, the headline is next year is 6.8. And if you actually add the off-balance sheet number, the number is marginally higher at 6.9. So basically, these two numbers have almost converged. So the most important point is that government has almost brought all the off-balance sheet liabilities into the public, into the budget domain. And the other thing is that the extra budgetary resources of the central government and the PSU has also significantly declined this year, which also shows that the government is well on its way of achieving a fiscal number, which may be ugly, but it is for real. So basically, it is all us for us to appreciate. Now, regarding your specific question on NSSF, I had looked into the NSSF numbers very carefully and the FCI. This is the, now here is the max. The total amount of expenditure increase, if I look into, is 4.1 lakh crores. If you compare the budget estimates and the revised estimates. Now, out of this 4.1 lakh crores, 3.1 lakh crores, I think of food subsidy. But out of this 3.1 lakh crores, if you look into the FCI outstanding and the liabilities, 1.2 lakh crore was the past dues and 1.9 lakh crore is the new spend. So total spend is basically, if you net out 1.2 lakh crores from 4.1 lakh crores, the total additional spend this year is actually 3 lakh crores, which is 1.5% of GDP, which is higher than the 1% consensus of all the economists in May that this was the direct fiscal impact. So if you ask me, the direct fiscal impact in the budget this year is 1.5% of GDP, which is higher than what we are all estimated. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that I'll not put the NREGA numbers are higher by 70,000 crores. Of course, there has been some adjustment on expenditure on items like, say, agriculture, on items like education, on items like basically home affairs. Interest is actually declined because of the lower interest rate, some amount of social welfare. But the point to note is that the government has spent 1.5% of GDP as fiscal impact, even if we, and please note that the fertilizer subsidy, because is also, I understand and I have spoken to the people, the fertilizer subsidy of 63,000 crore is actually an upfront payment for this year. It is not, does not include arrears of last year, because some of the respecting Chatham House rules, I think some of the fertilizer sector entities have actually repaying their dues. So if that is the case, all these players, fertilizer industry players, have got their payments, and all the payments for the next 3 months have also been paid to them. So overall, yes, there has been a cleanup, but the government has spent, and which is higher than the consensus of 1%. though, I mean, we can always differ whether it was low or high, but at least it is higher than what we had originally thought of.
So sorry, Soumya, I just realized it would have seemed to a lot of people, to economists talking abbreviations like NSSF, etc. In one line for all our say members, if you can just explain how did this FCI thing happen earlier versus now in very simple language.
Yeah. See, I'll explain to you. See, the Food Corporation of India is which actually does our procurement, was earlier not borrowing from the national NSSF fund, which is basically that small savings scheme corpus. So what used to happen is that the Food Corporation of India was given funds from that corpus. But and that was actually, that did not come on the budget. So on the fiscal deficit, because it was a balance sheet adjustment which was off the budget. Now what the government has done, it has taken off this adjustment into the budget, into the fiscal deficit. So that's why it is showing an expenditure increase this year. So therefore that's the max. And the only point which I want to make, the adjustment is only of 1.2 lakh crores, but there has been also an additional spent by the government.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Let me now move across to Nilesh Bhai. Nilesh Bhai, the budget really has focused on growth, as everybody has commented and everybody is happy about. And it has really put out a stretched sort of a fiscal roadmap, consolidation roadmap. And I've heard you talk a lot of times very passionately on this topic over the years. So I can't really resist my temptation to ask this question to you. How do you think that the rating agencies are going to take this? I mean, the fiscal deficit and the consolidation part. And secondly, what does this additional borrowing really mean, both from the equity as well as the bond market? Because I think from your vantage point, you are the right person to be commenting on both equity as well as the bond markets. Nilesh Bhai?
So, Sachidanand, this is the budget of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. It is telling rating agencies that we will follow path of fiscal prudence, but on our terms. Either to a country like Greece, which defaulted 20 times in last 400 years, was getting higher rating than India. And we, who haven't defaulted to foreigners since Harappa Mohenjo-daro days, 5,000 years plus, were told that you are just above speculative grade rating. This apartheid in providing rating needed to be challenged. And this budget is saying that if there is a need to support economy by spending, we will do it. And we really don't give a damn to your rating. Both rating agencies have confirmed post-budget that there will be no material change in India's rating. I think now it is time to take one step further and seek sovereign rating upgrade. What are these rating agencies actually rating? If they are giving us rating for rupee security, we are AAA because state has unlimited power to print currency. If they are giving rating for US dollar assets or borrowing, then they need to take into account our foreign exchange reserves. Our FX reserves with forward included is $600 billion. Our FX liability is roughly $565 billion. That includes NRI deposits of roughly $150 billion. And I'm giving rounded off numbers. I could be wrong by $5-10 billion here or there. Now, are NRI deposits going to go back? Answer is no. Most of them gets converted into residential deposit when NRIs return back home. So rating agencies are giving just above investment grade rating to India, who has more cash on his balance sheet than its debt. Shouldn't they be giving us sovereign rating upgrade based on what our cash position is, based on what our track record is? Or should they just keep on ruminating about your interest servicing and your internal debt servicing and so on and so forth? So net, this is the budget where we are doing what we think is appropriate for our economy rather than worrying about what Goras are going to talk about. Now, this doesn't mean that we have license to do whatever we want to do. Prudence is important, execution is key. The borrowing program on a gross basis for next year will be less than current year. That's the positive side. But it is still a large program, and we will require skill and deft management from RBI to ensure that this borrowing program goes through without material impact on yield curve. We need to ensure that these monies are invested in creating infrastructure so that it doesn't become inflationary in nature. So the borrowing program, if well managed by RBI, or if managed by RBI like current year, should not have material impact on yield, and government must use this money in a manner that it doesn't become inflationary spiral.
So Nilesh bhai, your take on the equity, the second part of the question was how will the equity as well as the bond markets really look at this entire thing? We've seen a differential sort of reaction on the budget day. How do you think this will pan out over time?
So my feeling is that equity markets have given 21 gun salute to this budget. The market is up rounded off 9% since the budget. All 3 days markets have gone up. On the bond market, yields have moved up a little bit, but we'll have to wait for 5th February RBI credit policy to figure out what happens going forward. This budget, Vallabhbhai mentioned as the bolder budget than 1991. I will put this budget at same level as 91-92 Dr. Manmohan Singh budget, which liberated India, or the dream budget by Mr. Chidambaram. This is the budget which is, appreciated by equity market because it lays foundation for growth. And in the fixed income market, if credit policy comes well, then hopefully there will be a range-bound movement in interest rates rather than a spike. Sachidanand, if I take a slightly lighter vein, this is Sita or Gita budget for us. If you remember old Hindi movie where Hema Malini played Sita and Gita, Sita was a shy, fearful girl, afraid of family members also. Gita was daring, bold, adventurous. This budget hopefully makes transition of India from being shy, introvert, fearful to facing the world on its own terms.
Very well put, Nilesh bhai. I think this is an example not many people would have heard, so absolutely bang on. Moving on to Anand now. Anand, again, I've heard you speak a lot on the Dhan-Harta model. You referred to it several times. Now, do you think this move to create an ARC or AMC for bad assets is the right decision, and how soon can this really materialize? Nilesh bhai mentioned execution as being key. And how effective will this be in a cleanup in the current crisis, given that the RBI is expecting, or it's already hinted at a surge in stressed assets? If you look at the FSR, it's clearly mentioned that we are almost going to see a near doubling of NPAs. So how would you respond to that? Do you think it can be done quickly, and how effective this is going to be?
Thanks, Sachidanand, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. First off, Sachidanand, I agree with what Shomo and Nilesh said. I think it's a good budget. It's very credible. I think all the accounting jugglery of the past is behind us. People like me who used to write reams of papers on how much of fudging is happening now don't have a job. So count 1+ on the unemployed number of people. Second, to Nilesh Bhai's point about growth, what I really like in this budget, it's focusing on jobs and output. A lot of us push for demand and consumption and government spending when it comes to growth. That is not enough, Sachidanand. We've seen this movie before. Just pushing up stimulus and just getting consumption and government spending up does not help. You need jobs and domestic output. with the focus on capital expenditure and with the focus on banks that you mentioned, which I'll come to, I think it gives a good chance for output and jobs. The last bit is I'm glad they have not raised taxes. It's okay to blow the fisc for a bit. When you have a nascent recovery, I think it's important you don't endanger the right now. So that full marks on the budget, all the right things. But as Nilesh Bhai said, lots of risks. And it would be very, very complacent of us to deny those risks. We have to be very, very careful. This could easily become a repeat of 2009, 2013 if we are not very, very careful. So two risks that Nilesh mentioned, which I will reiterate. One is, of course, execution risks. A lot of devil in the details, and it's going to be a long, painful road. It will not happen overnight. And second, inflationary risk as well. You have to be very, very careful on that. This can easily spiral out of control. Now, coming to your question, look, I think a critical part of reviving growth durably in this country is reviving our financial services ecosystem. It is in no position right now to fund our growth aspirations. And there is only so much the government can pump into infrastructure, etc. Eventually, the private sector will have to create its own investments and fund its own investments. Now, one statistic all of us know, in India, the bank credit to GDP ratio is 50%, right? In China, that number is well over 200%. And, we definitely need our credit to grow. Two things are required for that. One is we have to have the real economy perform, which means there should be good projects to fund, which requires a lot of execution skills. The second part is there should be willingness and ability amongst the banks and the institutions themselves to lend. And at the moment that is missing, both are missing, right? So we need both to be addressed. Now, how do we address this banking mess, as you mentioned, right? If you remember in 2016, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam spoke of the 4 Rs. I think that model still works. Essentially, you need recognition, you need recovery, you need recapitalization, and you need reforms, all 4 to happen. Now, bad bank or DFI by themselves are not enough. It has to be part of this 4R framework. Only doing one without the other makes it a very, very suspect process. Coming to your question about the bad bank, why is it required? And there's a lot of criticism of bad bank also, by the way. I'm a votary. Look, the amount of NPAs we are carrying is humongously large. Okay, as you said, the RBI base case is 13.5% of advances. Okay, base case. On top of that, there is about 8.5 lakh crores of write-offs, technical write-offs which have happened in banks. If you add that, the outstanding gross NPAs is well over 20% of advances. Okay, now we have a very good IBC. So December 2016, the IBC was a good law, but first of all, of course, it's going through teething legal issues and all that, and now plus it stopped right now till March. Secondly, no bankruptcy court in the world is geared towards handling the sizes that we are talking about. It is going to completely swarm the entire ecosystem. So what you need is you need a way to handle one time the current overhang of NPAs that you have. Now the MSME and the retail loans are best handled by the banks. You can't put them in a bad bank, but the large loans should be taken out and isolated and treated separately. Now, I don't know what the details of what the government proposes is. We have to wait for that. I believe it could be like the IBA model, which is different from what I will speak about. But the critical objectives of a bad bank and why it's failed in the past in India when we did IDBI, etc. You have to transfer it at market value. Now, we don't even know what the market value is. It's an amorphous thing. I mean, you and I can debate for hours together as to what the right market value is. But it has to be a Goldilocks value, which is neither too low, such that you take a huge bath and some private players get a lot of gain later on when the recovery happens, nor can it be too high, which becomes unrealistic, which means nothing will happen. It just shifts from one book to the other. So you have to get it at the right price. Why I like the Danaharta model in Malaysia. By the way, when Malaysia went through the Asian crisis, they had NPAs almost double of what we are talking about right now. They had more than 40% NPAs. So what they did was they created this government-owned ARC kind of a structure, AIF kind of a structure, which essentially offered a bid for every single large asset. Okay, so if it is a 100 ringgit loan, they said, I will buy it at 40. Now the CIMB and the Maybank was free to say, listen, that's too low. I will not give it to you at 40. In which case the bank would have to take reserves up to 40 so that it is adequately provisioned. Now, if you gave the loan at 40, what Danaharta would do is if it eventually recovered, let's say 70, so 30 more than where it bought, 80% of the excess, it would pay back to the original seller, which meant that there was only an upside for the person who was giving the loan to the bad bank. That kind of a structure ensured that the price was right. So that was the first part, that you got a good pricing done. The second part was, because it was government owned, a lot of the bad loans, by the way, were stuck because of government regulation. Very similar to our case. Land approvals not in place, environmental clearance is not in place, coal mines having a problem, PPA is not there. These required government intervention. So once the assets came into the government's books effectively, they changed regulations, they changed the rules of the game and got those companies up and running. So Danaharta closed shop in 5 years' time, and it recovered 58% of asset value, which is a fantastic outcome. But I have to reiterate, Sachidanand, it's not enough to have a one-time bad bank. Okay, what you need alongside that is to take reforms, both governance as well as management reforms, to ensure the cycle does not repeat. And that's where I think it becomes more important that things like the public sector banking reform, things like, for instance, governance reforms on auditors, on boards, on RBI supervision, etc., has to go alongside. It's a whole package of the 4 Rs. But yes, I am a fan. I'm glad the government has bitten the bullet of taking on this bad bank thing. Something had to give, Sachidanand. This, we have to get the system up and running to be in a position to lend again. I think this is the right step in that direction. We will fight for ages. We all need some jobs, so we will all fight for ages on what the right model is. But I'm glad they've jumped in and started to do this.
Just a question, related one. I'm tempted to ask you, will selling a PSU bank, right, is it going to be harder than selling an Air India?
It's a political question, and with a lot of political economy issues, which I'm sure other participants would be. Look, personally, I'll give you my personal opinion. What we need is PSU banks are 60% of the banking system. It's one thing to say there is stealth privatization happening, etc., but you need the large, chunky part of our bank, which is good, inherently good, to start, performing well again, right? And to me, there are a few issues which need to be sorted out. First, we need a level playing field. Public sector banks are under Bank Nationalization Act or under SBI Act. They are not under Companies Act, which means that there are constraints on how they can pay their people. There are constraints that they are under the 3 Cs, the CBI, CVC, CAG, etc. They're also under DFS. So DFS babus and netas can call them up and say, isko do, isko mat do. It doesn't happen now, but it used to happen in the past. And now also you have Mudra banking and Shamiana banking, etc. So it's best to get bankers, be allowed to do their professional role without interference from New Delhi. So what you need, therefore, is a distance. It's not a change of ownership. It's a distance between the government and the banking. So DBS is owned by the government, but it's via Temasek. It's not directly by the government of Singapore. So there is this PJ Naik committee, and you know it better than I do, Sachidanand. That I think is a great glide path towards freeing up the public sector system. Where I'm scared, Sachidanand, is if we get into this point about taking 2 token public sector banks and spend all our time on trying to privatize them, and if we do some bank consolidation, all these are good things. I'm not debating them, but we need things to happen fast. I would have much preferred that we did a large scale trying to get public sector banks under Companies Act, trying to build distance between Delhi and the public sector banks, allow them to be autonomous and accountable to the board, etc. I think that kind of reform would have been better rather than taking this particular route. But anyway, critic ka kaam hai criticize karna. So we'll go on here.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very lucid explanation. Abizar, if I could ask you, given your background, could you please help us all understand as to how are we or the government, how are we going to solve the valuation related problems while transferring assets? I mean, Anand just mentioned the examples overseas and our problems related to transfer of assets and the related issue of valuation. Also, this budget is spoken about setting up of a new DFI. There is a monetization pipeline, SPV for non-core asset sales and stuff like that. So there is a whole host of things that this budget has spoken about. From a medium term, how do you think that these can be executed well, given your experience? So I wanted to know from you, how are we going to solve the valuation related problem? And second, on these host of new announcements, how is the execution likely to happen? Typically, we've seen government really lag in terms of execution. So how can we do it better?
Right. Thanks, Sachinanand. Firstly, I agree with Professor Anand Narayan that I think the bad bank is the way to go. I've been a professor of the bad bank for some time now. And I think the valuation issue has a way to sort itself out. While if you look at the Indonesian experience that was just given, to say that they first valued the bank, in our case, the big problem is that if you are government sector, and because we have exposures over disparate number of banks, 20 banks, etc., valuation will become a non-starter. So again, from an execution point of view, let's start with something sensible. So while what has been proposed, I think, is a little complicated to say that the banks will, from whatever I heard of the DFS secretary post the budget, that the banks will transfer into an ARC, and the banks will be the contributor of the capital, and there will be no valuation right now. I would go the other way. I would actually say the best way to implement this, keeping in spirit, and mind you, there are two important issues in terms of bad resolutions. I take the point on the reform, but the one thing is that we are not able to resolve some of the bad debts because we hold it over 15 banks, and there are 15 decision makers for one asset, and it's impossible to get 15 people to agree to the same thing. So it's important that there is one entity controlling it, which is what that bad bank will achieve. The other thing is the 3 C's that Professor Ananthanarayan mentioned. We have to get out of this 3C problem to be able to resolve bad debts also. Otherwise, we will not be able to. A lot of intelligent, smart people exist in PSUs, but they are controlled by this 3C issue. So ideally, the way to go is to say that, fine, transfer it to an asset company at book value. And that's the reason why the government has said we'll set up a government ARC. Because if there's a government-to-government transfer, a book value is possible. Now, if you do that book value-based transfer and you do it like a normal ARC, 15% of the money can be held by the ARC and 85% can be held in a trust, and 100% of security receipts should be issued to the banks against it. Hear me out. Thereafter, you have an ARC model, which should then attract investors. And you can decide what kind of disparate investors you want. You need a team before that. So put in a team. We did that for NIIF. We can do a team here. Put in a team, and that team will then go out in the market and sell the asset reconstruction company stake. Privatize it from being a government company. Get capital in. The capital that you get in will be in two forms. One will be valuing the 15% SRs for whatever the value it at. And secondly will be the value of the platform, because as Professor Ananthanarayan said, that ARC is going to be an ongoing thing. Once we get that value, the 15% SR value can be paid back to the banks, and the banks will have to take the appropriate levels of provisioning, additional provisions that they have to take. And the balance amount will be used as working capital to run the ARC. ARC obviously has people who are incentivized on recovery. We have that model available in private equity, for example. Use that to then recover assets. Yes, they will also be a good influencer to the government to enable policy changes. And we don't need policy changes only for the bad assets. Frankly, we need it for the sector. If you look at, for example, land reforms, we need it for the sector. So ideally, it will also become, like IDFC was earlier, how NIIF is now, actually be a policy reform center also. The ARC will be for the government to say, listen, if you need to have effective bank lending, these are the reforms you need. And those will be learned as we go ahead. So I personally think that the current ARC model with a slight tweak will work very well. So that's what I think on price discovery. I think it should come in after the portfolio is aggregated in, because that will fetch better value. And that is the right value. Otherwise, there will be an arbitrage value. X bank will get X and Y bank will get Y. And we will never be able to agree on a PSU system with the private sector, any level of valuation. That's what I think on value. Coming to your other, reforms, take bank. I'll give you an example. We can complicate this quite significantly. If you look at simply the bank divestments we're talking about, we have 1,75,000 crore divestment target, and we're talking about divesting banks. First of all, which banks will you divest? If you simply look at it in market cap basis, Bank of India, 17,000 crore market cap. Bank of IOB, which I'm just talking about, these are 2 or 3 bad banks. IOB is around 18,000 crores. Central Bank is around 8,000 crores. How much do they fetch you? Totally, you're talking about 35,000 crores. Okay. Frankly, it's going to be very difficult to do this in terms of divesting banks. The only way you will fetch better than book value, or nearer to book value is when you sell it to a strategic buyer. So for example, if you've now come out of fact that large NBFCs can convert to banks, why don't you hand over a large NBFC to take over a government sector bank? Because what the NBFC lacks is a deposit base. He will see synergy value there. And if he comes and then buys it, he will pay you a valuation or a premium for that synergy. He will never be able to reach the kind of deposit bases that PSUs have today. So I think we need to monetize in a sensible manner rather than say we'll give it. We can always do an IDBI LIC deal. It's the easiest to do and get money. But I think the real deal to be done is when you actually offer it to an NBFC, a large NBFC, to say, why don't you convert to a bank? You have a 50, 80,000 crore AUM portfolio. I will give you 80, 100,000 crores of deposits. And he will love that. There will be a lot of concessions required in the bargain of getting this kind of a deal done. But I think PSUs can fetch best value for their loyalty and their deposit base. So I think that's what we need to do. And similarly in every section, take LIC for example. I mean, if you look at LIC's comparison on expected valuation, it's around 190,000 crores if you value it based on AUM. Because LIC has the maximum AUM. AUM as a percentage of market cap, do comparables. But if you value it as a percentage of profit, that number drops from 180,000 crores to 80,000 crores. And why is that? Because a high proportion of LIC's profits actually gets allocated to policyholders. Now, if you divest 20% of LIC, you get 16,000 crores. Just add up the numbers, you'll never add it up. So my view is that we need to really look hard when we are going to divest in how will the numbers realistically add up. And I come back to one of the recommendations I've always been having is that of a bank holding company. And that will come back to what Professor Anantharaman was saying, that are we willing to induce governance into our banks? Are we willing to get rid of a DFS controlled organization, as rightly said? And the best way to do that is to say that create a bank holding company, and just on back of the envelope numbers. If you just add the market cap of all the banks, it comes to around 450,000 crores. Roundabouts, it could be 10,000 crores here or there as the markets are increasing. If you assume that the government stake is around 60%, that's around 275,000 crores. And even if the government were to divest 49% of that bank holding company, so of course the biggest part is Mr. Ghosh's bank, Dr. Ghosh's bank, which is State Bank of India. But I'm just saying, if you add up everything and say that I dilute 49% of that bank holding company, I can raise 140,000 crores. And if the government did that, that's substantial. But what does that require? That requires you to actually make sure whoever comes in at that 49%, say sovereign wealth funds, they will demand governance changes. They will say all these banks need to come under the Companies Act and not under any Nationalization Act. They will say that there should be an independent board governing these companies. And then, by the way, these book value transfers that we think are easily possible between PSU banks and government-owned ARCs can't happen because there are shareholders other than the government. So I think if we look at the big picture, if you want to make these divestments happen, which is the most critical part, I think 175,000 crores, we will have to find doable ways of achieving some of these things, recognizing where we lie on problems.
Yeah.
So this is where.
So thank you so much. I think this is fascinating, and hope the policymakers are listening to some of this advice that we've heard just now.
Yeah, only thing is I thought this is Chatham House, so.
Indeed. Moving on to Ms. Rajshri, I didn't really see too much in terms of taxes or direct taxation. How do you view some of these minor tweaks that they've done? I mean, the PF thing, interest above, say, 250,000 and something for senior citizens, very minor sort of steps. How do you see this budget from a direct tax or taxation lens, Rajshri?
Thank you, Dr. Shukla, and a very warm good evening to all the participants. And after having heard my co-panelists, and wherein numbers were in crores and thousands of crores, right? We come down to the Aam Aadmi, and for the Aam Aadmi, if you were to look at it, it is always tax is important. And for the first time, and this is my personal view, for the first time, in fact, tax was not at the core of the budget, which in fact was a welcome move. So, very simply put, if you were to look at it from the common man stroke middle class, I would touch upon the small companies versus the large corporations. I will very quickly touch upon the investments, kind of, what has been doled out for the investor fraternity, both domestic and foreign, and very quickly how there have been some measures that have been taken to protect the domestic industry as well. Clearly banking on and clearly trying to leveraging the consumption base that we as a country command. So in terms of from a common man's, what I would say is the taxation of the contribution to Provident Fund, which is a voluntary Provident Fund, obviously kind of sends a message that you do have pretty much not necessarily the high net worth individuals, but people in the topmost bracket who would park their funds in PF. You've got to pay a cost. There has to be some revenue for the government as well. And they have tried to tap some of these small pockets to garner that revenue. They've also but at the same time, they've also given benefit, although it's very small in quantum. But if you were to look at the large base, the leave travel concession, which has not been availed by people during the COVID period because of these travel restrictions, that's a benefit that they've extended. They've done a good thing in terms of segregating the small companies in terms of compliance. They've also, for the first time, spoken about mediation for small companies, which again is a huge step that they've taken, although a lot more is expected in terms of, because we do see that mediation is going to be one of the key factors to kind of settle all your past disputes and really stand on a clean footing. When we say stand up India, clean up all the past, which is what they've done with the VSV. They've also done similar schemes under GST. Under VAT, sorry, and service tax. The question really is that, that has been the thinking. They also have done, doled out a few concessions for the investor fraternity, be it the what I would say is the NRI population, which is a pretty large base, and to which they've kind of focused on the IFSC. So the IFSC, in the true sense, has been used as a destination to attract, and somewhere, although we've got there's quite a bit way to go there. We want to compete with Singapore. We want to compete with Dubai as a financial center hub. So baby steps have been taken. And the big welcome is also the, setting up of, or at least the announcement of having a securities market code, consolidating and trying to bring in all the, at least SEBI, SCRA, Government Securities Act under one umbrella. Because if we were to look at it from an international investor standpoint, it's good to have one act that they would want to refer to rather than looking at, different aspects. Good measure, again, the Advanced Ruling Authority, which was pretty much non-functional. I think that introducing the board is again seen as a welcome move. The fact that we also are focusing more on digitization, I think again is nice. So what are the misses? The misses essentially is, although we talk about, and sorry, last but not the least, this entire issue about the goodwill taxation and non-allowance and no depreciation being allowed. If you look at the intent, i.e. it is more focused on the DCF valuation, and it is pretty much trying to tax wherein there is not, it's just majorly book entries. And now, of course, that does have an impact on your deferred tax asset, especially for companies, large corporations. So that's something which has kind of created a little bit of ripples. And at the same time, what I would say is access to India, i.e. any overseas, any online transaction from now on, okay, there is a 6% cost that's going to come in, the equalization levy. So there are these small pockets of revenue that have been created. Intent is to try and take some steps on ease of doing business. We are there, but still there's a lot to be done. I would say the miss is essentially ground reality in terms of there could have been a little bit more liquidity that could have been provided to at least the larger middle class fraternity. But one could also argue that government spending, government push for domestic consumption could lead you to that situation. But nevertheless, there's no harm in asking. And at least from a financial sector standpoint, I would say, many measures in terms of the cooperative banks. And I think my co-panelists have covered all of that. NBFCs still kind of, there's stuff to be done. Because as a chamber also, whatever we had put forth, I think most of them have come through, but still there is a bit ground to be covered there. And the entire utility, which I'm sorry, it's a very tax term, but believe me, ground reality is that the digital aspect, which and the fact that we are going faceless, the question really is that there are a lot of hiccups in the utility, which is used by large, medium, small taxpayers. I think a lot needs to be done there. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You walked us through quite a few things on the taxation side. We thought there's not much. What I'll do is, in the interest of time now, very quickly, get a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, starting with you, Rajshri. How do you rate the budget? We'll move in the reverse direction now. So starting with you and going on to Soumya in the end.
Yeah, given the fact that the FM is a lady who's presented, it's not bad to give me the first go, right? On a lighter way. Okay. If I were to look at putting on as a tax person, I would say we are 7.5. And overall, I would give it a rating of almost 9.
Wonderful. Abizar? Your rating on a scale of...
I wish I could give a subject to execution rating, but I think the budget rating is clearly in a 7 or an 8.
Wonderful. Anand?
Just for point of reference, the last year's budget, February 20th, I would have given February 2020, I would have given 4.5 out of 10. This one I will give 9 out of 10. But with exactly what Abizar mentioned, huge risk of execution, lots of other risks, and we are in a tough spot even now. Please don't become complacent because I've given you high marks. There's a long, long way to go. We're talking about the next decade or so of work to be done.
Wonderful. Doubled in 1 year, not bad, right? Your rating. Soumya?
I'll see, before I give us rating to this budget, I should also, this is a conditional budget. If you just ask me in terms of aviation probability, what the RBI will do. So if the RBI actually what has been doing for the last 1 year does it, and if you just borrow, there is a theory of this game of chickens. Basically, if that is played properly, I would give the budget a score of 9.
It's not fair to rate the budget and making it conditional on RBI, but...
Now that I understand, but I think there is an element of risk in the debt market.
Yes.
But the debt market is closely looking, and I think if the central bank, see, the issue is the fiscal independence and monetary fiscal dominance of the monetary policy. No country in the world has monetary policy dominating fiscal. So from that point of view, if the RBI actually has been working the way it has been doing, significant support to the central government, I don't hesitate to give the budget a score of 9 or even more.
Wonderful. So there we have it. I think everybody's given at least a 9, if I heard that correct. Did I ask Nilesh Bhai or did I jump to Soumya? Sorry, Nilesh Bhai?
I was thinking you were my friend, so you skipped me.
I'm extremely sorry.
No, in intent, it is 10 out of 10. But as Anant and Abizar mentioned, we have to get it executed.
Right.
Intent is not sufficient. Execution is key. We need Cheteshwar Pujara, who will stand on the 5th day at Gaba pitch and take 11 hits on his body. We need Rishabh Pant, who will go with an open mind saying that ठोक देंगे इनको, we will win the match. Execution is key. Intent तो हर किसी की जीतने की होती है, but execute भी तो करना पड़ेगा.
Absolutely. Well said. So I think if we have questions from the audience, we can quickly have some questions to the panelists. Mr. Khosla, do we have?
Yeah, Dr. Shukla, there are a couple of questions. You can start with it, and I think more questions will come.
I can't see it on the chat, so if you could just maybe.
Okay, then I'll read out the question.
Yeah, sure.
The first one is by Manish Balwani. who asks, how much time do you believe will it take the government to clean the total gross bank NPAs, assuming that the government is serious and avoids all the red tapeism and bureaucracy?
Can I give some number to it? Such as not about the time. So
Please
if
go
you
ahead.
allow me.
Yeah.
See, I think I'll echo what Avizar and Anand said. Today morning, I was doing a calculation basically. See, what is the value of the stress asset in the system out of 10 lakh crores? So basically, the AMC ARC has been formed, which has been formed to, if we just give a number to it, what will be the total amount of equity capital which could be required to set up this? That amount comes as low as 5,000 crore because the banks currently have 85% provision. And if we take the recovery rate as 43% NCLT, I think that's the point which Anand mentioned. The potential of writing back to the bank books could be up to 1 lakh crore. So with 5,000 crore, you can leverage it and get 1 lakh crore back if we can execute it properly. So that actually explains a part of the question, how quickly we can address the bank balance sheet.
Thank you, Soumya.
Next question is by Dr. Prasad Akrekar. How is this Atmanirbhar budget will promote Indian IT, hardware, electronic and telecom to take on Chinese imports head on?
Nilesh Bhai, may I request you to take this, please?
So I don't think so. We should aim to compete with China. That will be the match between David and Goliath. We have to work where we can make a niche, where we can make an edge. We have to, so if we look at global companies are moving out of China to various countries. And recently on WhatsApp, we did see a forward where many companies have chosen Vietnam, 97 companies to be precise, compared to 10 odd companies which have come to India. But see, compared to all our competitors, we have poor infrastructure, we have poor policies, but they don't have as large a domestic market as we have. So we need to excite people by bringing and leveraging our domestic market. Fortunately, this production-linked incentive scheme is a very good structured scheme. If you remember, some time back, we had launched Textile Upgradation Fund with an intention to make India global textile superpower. We gave concessional financing to entrepreneurs to set up textile factories. Tens of thousands of crores were given, but eventually we didn't become superpower in textile because most of the plants were gold-plated, money was siphoned off, and they all became NPAs. Now this time we have learned from Textile Upgradation Fund and we are not giving any money for setting up a plant which can be gold-plated. We are only giving money if this plant starts producing. In Textile Upgradation Fund, there was some sort of cap for allocation. In PLI scheme, it's completely meritocracy. If you can produce faster, you will get incentive. So this PLI scheme is a very well-structured scheme. Now it needs to be executed on ground. And here, I just want to say that India has two models for getting companies from outside of India. One is a Singur model, other is a Sanand model. In Singur, India's most respected business of Tata's wanted to set up their automobile plant. For a variety of reasons, they struggled and finally they had to move out. In Sanand, apparently they came when Suswagatam or welcome message was sent by Chief Minister of the state to Mr. Tata. Land was pre-allotted, infrastructure was built simultaneously, 24/7 approvals were given, and in 18 months, Nano started rolling out of Tata factory. If we follow Sanand model in inviting companies out of China, leverage domestic market access, and use production-linked incentive schemes, I'm sure we will be able to make a mark in certain segments like electronics, automobile, auto components, textiles, and so on and so forth. We should not aim to compete with China. They are far bigger than us. They are way ahead of us. We need to exploit what is our strength using Sanand model, PLI scheme, and domestic market.
Absolutely.
The next one is by someone who doesn't want to reveal his or her name. It says the center's liabilities have surged in FY22. The last time this had happened, inflation had played an extremely important role in bringing down debt. However, this option to inflating away debt is not available this time with the monetary policy framework in place. How can India reduce its debt to GDP in such a case?
Anant, would you mind answering that? Or
I'll take a stab at it. I'm sure Shomo can jump in as well,
Yeah,
as
sure.
Nilesh Bhai.
Romeo, you can as well.
Yeah. So look, it's a great question, and you know, I want to re-emphasize this is a great budget, but a long road ahead. And I loved Nilesh Bhai's test match analogy. What are the risks and what are the challenges even now? Several sectors of our economy are still very stressed. You know, we've talked about bank and financial services and NBFCs, power, real estate, telecom, airline and shipping, MSMEs. There is a lot of, you know, pressure out there. Second, as I said earlier, it's not enough if we get consumption and government spending through. Okay. By the way, consumption is picking up, and thank God for that. You know, GST collections of 1.2 lakh crores in January, fantastic news, very good news. Government spending clearly is holding up. They've been spending quite a bit in the last few months, and they clearly intend to spend more. But here is where the playbook of 2009, 2013 bears listening to. And if you don't remember history, then we're condemned to repeat it. At that point of time, after the crisis, our consumption picked up, our investments picked up, our government spending picked up, everything picked up. Now that should have led to nice growth. Instead, we did not create domestic output. We did not create jobs. Okay. And that becomes the crux. So if you're not creating output, your consumption demand, all your demand, it goes into stuff like gold, electronics, toys, cement, rather fertilizers, chemicals, plastics, all of which we start to import. And therefore our trade balance goes for a toss. Or it goes into things like proteins, etc., and where your food inflation starts to go up. So you have inflation, you have external imbalance, you have a fiscal deficit, which is a problem. You have financial sector, which becomes a problem, and then when a taper tantrum happens, then you have a crisis. Where we missed out that time was jobs and output. The good news is, at the moment, we are focusing a lot on jobs and output. So as Nilesh mentioned, PLI is good, labor reforms have happened, tax cuts have happened. Now there is a focus on investments into infrastructure, textile parks, and so on and so forth. At least the intent is good. There's a lot of focus on trying to make in India self-sufficiency as well, which is also good. So hopefully we will not repeat the mistakes of the past, but that execution has to be clinical. Given the size of our debt, given the size of stresses in the system, the only way out is for us to create domestic jobs and output. And that has to be the focus over the next 4-5 years. If we get that, I don't believe the monetary policy framework can control inflation in this country. I think we're giving too much weightage to that. If we create jobs and output, every problem will be solved, whether it is inflation, whether it is the debt outstanding, public debt outstanding, whether it is external imbalance, internal imbalance, all of that will get taken care of. That's what we need to focus on. China fudges numbers far more than we do, right? But they did one thing right, which is create jobs and output. We've got to do the same. Uske baad jo karna hai kar lo, but just get jobs and output in there.
True. I mean, growth remains the holy grail.
Sachin, can I give a very lighter vein comment?
Bilkul.
Well, we just need to do one thing: change LIC's name to HDFC Life. HDFC Life has 1,30,000 crore AUM and 1,39,000 crore market cap. LIC has 35 lakh crore AUM. You can imagine market cap kya banega. The point on a serious note is that we have to upgrade our PSUs. The whole market trades at 3 times price to book. Our entire PSU portfolio trades at below book. Now, if we can re-rate our PSUs, imagine the value growth which government will get. The total holding in PSUs roughly rounded off is 7 lakh crore. Post-budget rally would have increased it, give me benefit of doubt. Now assume that PSUs will start trading at average market level. That's 14 lakh crore additional income. Abhi sir, he is knowledgeable person on valuation. He gives LIC is 2 lakh crore. Now, can you re-rate LIC in a manner where it can be valued at 35 lakh crore? You have to work. And as Anant mentioned, boss, ye koi easy cheez nahi hai. It's very difficult. But can you execute it? like Dan Harta, like Temasek, like GIC.
Absolutely. I think some of these softer issues are underrated, and we really struggle with them very often and for quite some time now.
Next is a question by Anmol Modi, and she asked, have we sidelined the women empowerment schemes in this budget?
Can I take a shot at that? This
Yes,
is
please.
something which I wanted to talk. This is the first budget where women have been empowered. We all talked about gender equality, but this is the first budget where women have been empowered like never before. You know, women can work in hotel sector, banking sector, IT sector, KPO, BPO, in Abhizar's office, in Anand's college, in Somyo's bank, but women are not allowed to work in night shifts in office. I'm sure Rajeshri must be working pretty late in her office if there is a need. But Rajeshri could not have worked in a factory floor. That was our law. This is the budget in which we have removed that. We have discarded that limitation. India is the largest grower of cotton in the world, best quality cotton in the world. We have the largest spinning capacity whereby we convert that cotton into yarn. We have the best fabric weaving capacity whereby we convert that yarn into fabric. And then we give it to Bangladesh and Vietnam and China so that they can create value add by making a garment. My garment factory works one shift a day because I can't employ women in the night. Bangladesh, Vietnam, Sri Lanka works 3 shifts a day. Now, if this budget has changed this limitation, women will be allowed to work with appropriate protection in the night shift. Our garmenting can take off. Today, Bangladesh exports $45 billion of garments. We are at $17 billion. Does Bangladesh grows cotton? Not much. Do they have spinning capacity? Not much. Do they have weaving capacity? Not much. We are fully integrated. So this is the budget which has actually empowered women in real life.
And one thing I just want to ask, just add to Nilesh's point, to the point, I think some of the social security schemes which the government has been doing for the last couple of years, and we have actually done an extensive research. This research actually, and we are going to have written a paper on this, which is now in the process of getting published. This paper actually has looked into sample of accounts in State Bank of India and tried to look it into how it has empowered the woman in terms of some constructed indices. And actually it has empowered the woman in the sense that it has made them financially more independent, because the money which goes into, because these accounts are mostly used for remittances, and when the money goes back to this is sent back, the woman actually takes decision in terms of how to use this money. So this is basically on the rural side. So there has been a continuous process of trying to empower people, and women also has been a part of it if you look into the social inclusion. The other is basically the that Ujjwala scheme. So there are several initiatives which we can use to show that there is an element of empowerment.
So I think with so many men jumping in to prove the point that a lot has been done, I don't think we'll request Rajshri to add to it. I think the point has been proven. Next question, please. I mean, if we have time, I guess we're running out of time, Mr. Khosla. So maybe one last question if you have.
Sandeep is rejoining.
Oh, okay.
I have to leave. I have another call. So if you all allow me, I can take a leave.
Sure. Thank you so much, Soumya. Thank you for your time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can just ask maybe one last question. Otherwise, we can probably move in for the customary vote of thanks.
One more question is on what is the view of the panel on some of the taxes which have come in on items like solar energy and all.
Could I mean, any panelist could probably
I can
try
take
and take a stab at that. Yeah.
I can take it if it's okay.
Yeah,
with
if you
everybody.
could start with it.
Yeah.
Please.
So solar inverters, yes, there's been an increase in customs duty, but that's pretty much the step to protect domestic industry. And if you look at some of the changes in the rates as well that have been introduced, there is no real impact on the consumer except for increasing custom duty rates on some of the goods, but clearly with a view to protect, the domestic sector and actually encourage domestic industry.
Shukla,
Thank you,
you're
Raj. Yeah, thank you, Rajshri. Mr. Khosla, I think we can go in for the.
Yeah, Sudhir has joined us. May I request our President, Bombay Chamber, Mr. Sudhir Kabaria, to summarize today's session.
Thanks a lot, Mr. DG and Dr. Shukla. I must say, without sounding very subjective, because obviously I'm presiding over the chamber, but very objectively speaking, personally, I listened to as a participant throughout. That is one of the most intellectually enriching sessions on the budget I have been privileged to listen to. So many thanks for an excellent moderation. And of course, many thanks to all our esteemed panelists, Professor Narayan, Dr. Ghosh has just left, Nilesh, as always, a great pleasure, Abhizar, as well as Rajeshri. I just have two observations and we can just conclude them. The first one, the one thing which struck me and which I think in some ways has been reiterated, but what struck me was that perhaps the alignment between the economic survey, in other words, the views of the CEA and the budget, at least to my knowledge in recent memory, has been the most as far as this budget goes. Our own analysis at the chamber and elsewhere suggests that, that we have not seen this kind of alignment on some of the recommendations. We talked about, the ratings, and I know there's a question we couldn't have get time to answer about a potential junk rating coming in from one of the foreign agencies. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out. But that was a clear clarion call in the CEA's economic survey, as we know, and the budget seems to have wholeheartedly accepted that recommendation to basically disregard rating agencies in this hour of crisis. And I think and so on health, on NPAs, etc. The second observation, which is more for us, Mr. Khosla, and first Mr. Nilesh Shah heads our banking committee. Dr. Shukla, you had our Economic Affairs Committee. I think this is the time when we as a chamber, we should really measure up to what has been our original credo when the chamber was formed, which is to be an impartial intermediary between business and government. And when I say this, we are always circumspect, and rightly so. And I think the message here from this panel also is that the key lies in execution. It is a long haul, without a doubt. But if I may say, what perhaps we now as a chamber need to do is wholeheartedly applaud the reforms which the government has announced during the pandemic and in the budget. But frankly, also see how as a chamber we can facilitate the right communication. We have such an intellectual powerhouse in the chamber where we can message the right way for why these reforms are important. Now, I say this because obviously we know what's happening with the farm reforms and where it is all getting scuttled. And this is not the place and time to discuss that. But my worry is when we talk about privatization in such a big way, we talk about two, public sector banks and one insurance company. Already there were some dark hints thrown at by one of the ex-finance ministers who was referred to by Nilesh for his dream budget to say, let's wait and see what the unions will say. Now that is as dark a hint and as direct a hint as any politician can give as to what is the wish and perhaps what is the plan, if I may say, to derail some of these initiatives. And it has been no different when some other party has been in power and the current ruling party may have been in opposition. But what I'm trying to say that as a chamber, I think we owe it to the country and to the economy at large to really stand up in an hour like this and say, these are the 10 reasons intellectually, backed up why these reforms are necessary. That communication we should be bold enough to give, not just because we want to support the government of the day, because we genuinely believe these reforms are good for the country, and and therefore take a side and say that, look, any kind of frivolous opposition to derail some of this is just going to take us back. You can play your politics, you do whatever you want, but we have we have the obligation to say what is right for the economy and for the country. So I will just leave with that thought. We'll need all these intellectual discussions to come out, Mr. Khosla, in a manner which the chamber can wholeheartedly present and help communicate. Because I agree with one thing which came out of this panel more than anything else is it will be a long haul. It will be a long haul in execution, but also long haul in terms of the political economy and the ability, despite the majority which the current government has, to push through some of these contentious reforms. And we should do our bit to help in this process. Thank you very much. As I said, I'm sure our participants would agree that it was one of the most enriching discussions, and thanks everyone for making the time and contributing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeep.
Thank you, Mr. Kapadia. What I'll do is be in touch with all the three committees and see that whatever you just said, we are able to drive it properly and then communicate to the government as well on whatever you just told us. So thank you to all our panelists, and I would also like to thank our sponsors, our partners, without whom this wouldn't have been possible: Tata Consultancy Services, Tata Investment Corporation Limited, Harinagar Sugar Mills, Aditya Birla Capital, and Soulflower. And many thanks to all our participants. I'm sure, as Mr. Kapadia has mentioned, you would have enjoyed today's session. Dr. Shukla, would you want to wind up after the President's suggestion?
Absolutely. I think we've had a wonderful session. Thanks to all our panelists for a very enriching discussion. We've got several things. I mean, I have several takeaways. CSR budget from Shoumya, apartheid, like Nilesh Bhai said, Sita and Geeta, obviously. Anand cautioned us in terms of the risks. I mean, let's not really uncork the bubbly before, we achieve some really significant milestones. Abhisar really gave a very detailed perspective, deep dive into some of the issues and how we can properly resolve. And also, I think for the first time, we've seen a tax consultant really being happy that nothing came out of the budget. So Rajshri was really happy that nothing came out. So I think this really sums up and what the President just said. I think we do owe it to the country in terms of really taking it forward from a chamber perspective. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you once again.